The comparison operators in MySQL work on a very different basis to the arithmetic operators. In order to understand how the comparison operators work, it's necessary to have a basic feel for the concept of Boolean values. A Boolean value is the most basic unit of operation by which a computer works. It can be either true or false. You may have heard that computers process all their information through binary data, that is ones and zeros. Well, that's exactly what a Boolean value is. It's either a true or a false, on or off, 1 or 0. MySQL will evaluate every expression that we tell it to either a true or a false, unless it gives some specific other result. Let me give an example to show the kind of thing that I mean. If we select an expression such as 5 equals 5, now this is quite clearly true. 5 is always equal to 5. MySQL will return the result 1. Now this may seem a little confusing. Where does 1 come into the whole equation? All we've said is 5 equals 5. The thing we need to remember is that 1 in this case represents a true Boolean value. If we, for instance, put in 5 equals 7 and ask MySQL to evaluate that and return the result of that expression, we get a 0, which means MySQL has considered the validity of 5 equals 7 and reckons that it's false, which seems a pretty good judgment to me. So this is basically the way that Boolean values work, and is the kind of response that we're looking for from our comparison operators. We can make this as complicated as we like. We can say things like 5 plus 5 equals 10. MySQL responds that will be true. And of course we can also give it completely false values, such as 5 times 5 equals 10, and it will evaluate that false. So that's the basic concept. Ones and zeros. An expression will always return a Boolean value. Or that is an expression that uses a comparison operator, such as the equals sign. Now the equals sign that we've been using is the first of our comparison operators that we're going to look at. There are some more. There's this sign, which is a greater than sign. 5 is greater than 3. If we ask MySQL to evaluate that statement, it gives us a 1, which, as we just learned, means true. Whereas, if we went back and said 5 is greater than 70, MySQL tells us that this is false, very helpfully. We can also use 5 is less than. So 5 is less than 7, true. 5 is less than 3, false. Interestingly enough, 5 is less than 5 is also false. To give a broader kind of less than statement, which includes the actual number that we're specifying, we can say this is lesser than or equal to 5. And that will give a true response. There's also a greater than or equal to, which we can use as well. This is useful when we want to set some kind of particular parameter which includes the number that we're giving, rather than saying that it has to be less than or greater than a certain number. So those are the greater and lesser operators. We also have not equals. So if we say 5 is not equal to 3, we use an exclamation mark and an equal sign. Exclamation mark is known as a bang. So 5 is not equal to 3. We can see that MySQL returns the response true, or 1. If we select 5 is not equal to 5, then MySQL will return a false. That's because what we're asking it to evaluate is that the our claim, essentially, that the two sides of the expression are not equal. However, 5 is equal to 5, and so the whole expression evaluates false. There is an alternative syntax to writing the not equals, which is this. It does exactly the same thing. It's a rather outmoded way of expressing the not equals syntax, but it's included for downward compatibility or perhaps sideways compatibility with other systems of SQL. The last operator that we need to look at in terms of numeric data, because we're only looking at the numeric comparison operators in this movie, we're going to look at the string ones in the next movie, is the null operators. If we say 7 equals null, now as we learned before, a null value is a value that hasn't been set at all. It's not a 0, it's just a value that hasn't been set and is left empty in memory. We get the result null, which is strange. What's happening here is that any time there's a null value included within the expression, MySQL automatically calls the whole expression null. So what we really need to do there is to use this special operator, which is like an equals operator, but it's safe to use with null. In which case the expression will evaluate to false rather than to null. Of course, if we use 2 nulls on either side, we get a true response to our select query, whereas if we just use a simple equal sign, we could get a null value. We can also use the isNull operator, which does a similar thing, but it's always checking the first number against null, whereas the null safe equal sign that we used up there, which consists of a lesser than and equals and greater than sign, all put together to form this null safe equals, we can check any 2 variables against each other, whereas the isNull will always check a value against null. In this case, 3 is not null, so we get a 0. If we check, for instance, null is null, we get a 1 because null is null. So, these are the basic numeric comparison operators that we're going to be using. The last one you need to learn at this point is not null. In this case, we could test it by checking to see whether null is not null, which is false. Of course, null is null, and therefore it's not null, if you get my drift. All these double negatives can get a bit confusing, but have a tinker around in your MySQL monitor and make sure that you understand exactly how all of these comparison operators work. In our next movie, we're going to move on to string operators.